Call to order special meeting of the Brandon Planning Commission. We'll start with some of the usual items that we cover in a regular monthly meeting. And then we'll hear a presentation by Logan Solomon of the Rutland Regional Planning Commission on Act 181, which provides new guidance related to the state's Act 250 legislation. We welcome public participation, but I do not see anyone participating at this point. Right. Our recording secretary wasn't able to attend this evening, so we have a special appearance by the town manager to help record the minutes. Let's see, let's start off by do I have a motion to adopt the agenda and/or are there any amendments to be made?
This is Natalie Steen, and I move to approve the agenda.
Do I have a second?
This is Neil Sillins, and I second.
All in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. There were no nays. And next up is approving or amending the minutes from our April 7th meeting. Do I have a motion on approving the minutes? And are there any corrections?
I move to approve the minutes.
And I second.
Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Next up is public participation, but we do not have public present. The zoning administrator's report. Unfortunately, the zoning administrator is not able to attend. They had a family emergency. So item number 6 is a request for a volunteer to participate on the Brandon Historic Preservation's working group for the town workbook. Do we have any volunteers?
Right. It.
This is Lisa Peluso. I'd like to understand what the time commitment is expected to be, because that's my only concern since I travel quite a bit.
So it's a committee that's being pulled together with 2 people from the public. The chair of the Preservation Commission will be there. I think the museum will also be present, and Planning Commission. If I left anybody out?
One architect, one design person.
Okay.
Kind of a big one.
Right. So I think you've seen the workbook. From my perspective, there were historic photos and photos from 2001. So I think the 2001 should be replaced with current photos. I think one of the larger sections that would need to be amended would be around the segment 6 project. I would also personally think that we should spend more of an effort towards bringing Forestdale into the workbook. Now, we've talked a little bit about this back when we were doing the Blue O, that we really do not have design guidelines in the Blue O. But the workbook, which has a lot of, historic architectural design guidelines in it, is something that we should point developers to, especially as it pertains to downtown areas, historic areas.
Don't we do that already in the Blue O? Or is it the town?
We do in the Blue O.
Yeah.
I don't know whether Larry does it or not. Right. It's kind of a tough one to answer. I mean, this commission does not meet very often. I'm not sure how often the working group would meet. I don't
Is
think
this a grant funded?
they were looking for a grant. Chair recognizes the town manager.
This is Seth Hopkins. So my understanding from Dennis Reisenweaver, who's the chair of the commission, is that the working group will meet separately from the commission. The Historic Preservation Commission meets generally quarterly. Not a big deal. What he's done with the workbook is divided out into chapters turn those into Word documents that can be edited. And I believe his intent is once a month, kind of just plop through one or two. As Jack alluded to, some of them are not going to require a lot of updating. Some of them are going to require a significant amount. So I would think maybe once a month for 8-10 months would be my guess.
I mean, there are sections like free parking that are in there that also should be updated. I'm not sure if the parking committee has come to any conclusions. I haven't seen any yet.
I could probably help with that if my writing skills are strong enough. I'm not sure if my knowledge base is strong enough, but I can let the smarter people deal with that and I can write and edit.
What a wonderful way to learn.
That's right.
I'm happy to provide advice when needed.
Can I have your cell phone number?
Yeah. I just can't commit. I can't follow the committees I'm on.
So should we nominate Lisa Paluso as the representative from the Planning Commission for the town workbook?
I move to nominate Lisa.
We have a second.
I'll second.
Thank you.
All in favor?
I,
Right.
And I will be happy to offer whatever assistance I can as well.
Thank you.
I thought that my knowledge base was so low that it wasn't even worth trying to catch up.
Okay.
You should reach out, if you have questions.
Yeah,
that
for
Any one of
sure.
us can
yeah,
either answer or find the answer to.
And I may just come to our meetings with a list of things I want to run by since
Okay.
our heavy lift is done for,
as long as I can provide the advice, not on a time, like in a meeting time, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? So, because I can't be constrained by meetings, right? I
Sure.
already have 2 minutes.
I understand.
I'm getting my master's, so.
Oh,
And I think.
because you needed one more thing.
Yeah, and I have 4 kids. 2 are in college, yeah, I'm just overloaded.
Totally understand that.
So we've run through the regular items for our monthly meeting. Let's open it up for Logan to take us through the Act 181 information presentation.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. This is Logan Solomon with the Rutland Regional Planning Commission. I am here tonight to talk about the Rutland Regional Plan, as well as a part of the Rutland Regional Plan, which is the future land use map. And there are some changes in state law, specifically Act 181, that kind of changed some of the implications of this map. And so we'll be kind of talking about the regional plan writ large, but there'll also be kind of a focus on this map and the implications for Brandon specifically. And those implications stretch into the state's designation program as well as Act 250 jurisdiction. I have a slide handout, if you will, that I'm going to hand out. And for anyone who might, see this recording later, this slide handout is available at rutlandrpc.org/plan 2026. And as well as, I'll just mention this now, and I'll probably mention it again, that the draft map we'll be looking at that will be on this table is also available at that same website for folks who might want to look at it, or, if you all want to look at it later in your own time. Also, I had ahead of this meeting, we had provided prep materials to Jack, I believe, and I have a few extra copies of those as well for folks if just as a reference, it provides more detailed information. This is the slide handout. And the reference handout I mentioned, is anyone interested in having that on their side? I have 3 copies. Oh, great.
I'll take that.
Yeah.
I have it on my phone, but.
Yeah, paper's always good since it's already here. Got 2 more, any interest?
You have one already?
So the cover of the slides here kind of has it conveys that we've had multiple phases of public engagement on this regional plan, and I'm here tonight to kind of speak to this is part of phase 3 of our public engagement. So for instance, in phases 1 and 2, we had meetings with all the select boards in all 27 towns in the region. And another example is in phase 1, we also held a whole bunch of in-person events and a survey where we got responses from over 1,200 people. So it is to say that this is the last phase of public engagement. We've been kind of going through these phases over the course of the last year and a half. For phase 3 of public engagement, we kind of have these 2 questions that are on these slides. Does the plan reflect the right community economic development priorities for the region? And in a second, I'll explain what exactly is community economic development. And then, do these priorities make the region a place you want to live, work, and play? If you go now and flip over to the next page, or the next side of, I guess, the same page, there's just an overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to briefly talk about what is the purpose of a regional plan, what are the chapters or elements, if you will, of the regional plan, just to kind of set the stage. And then the focus will be on the draft regional future land use map. And ultimately, it is just a draft. We're still working on refining it, and this is kind of part of that process. And we will be talking about the map in terms of like a regional perspective, but a lot of the conversation on the map will be focused on Brandon because we're here tonight to talk about it. Part of this conversation will be that the town has an option to opt into Tier 1B, which is a type of Act 250 exemption, and I'll speak to what exactly are these Act 250 exemptions, and we can kind of talk about those implications. And then I'll kind of also talk about some of these other ways we're engaging about the plan writ large to kind of close it out. So now flipping over to the next slide on the handout, which relates to the purpose and design of the regional plan. You'll notice in the next couple slide in the top right corner, you'll see applicable Vermont statutes. And this is to say that there are specific statutes that kind of guide the regional plan. So in this case, there are statutes that specifically state what is the purpose of the regional plan. And there's also statutes pertaining to like the requirements of the regional plan, very similar to how there are, requirements for a town plan, albeit that these requirements are slightly different. There's definitely some overlap, but there is definitely some differences as well. The regional plan, our organization has had a regional plan dating back to 1971 or 1972. Part of this plan is having a future land use map. And these plans have kind of been updated every 5 or 8 years or so. And so this regional plan that we're working on, the time frame for the regional plan is an 8-year cycle from 2026 to 2034. And it's really revolving around community economic development, which what that means is balancing economic development with these social, cultural, or environmental priorities. The kind of at the center of the plan is an analysis of present and future land uses and kind of an analysis of where to grow and conservation. While I mentioned that, the plan is guided by Vermont statutes, it's also guided by our principles as an organization. So we strive to be flexible. There are 27 municipalities in the region, and their I guess you could say land use planning values really vary. Some, about a quarter of the municipalities in our region do not have zoning, while 3/4 do. And so there's, there's a diversity of, I guess you could say values and, how much regulation a municipality wants to have. And we want to be flexible, acknowledging that spectrum and just broader unique needs across the region's 27 municipalities. We also want the plan to be locally led. And while, getting community support is good just for the sake of it being good, it's also increases the probability of success and ensures that communities aren't being favored over each other. And so that's why we've really been trying to make an effort to do public engagement over the last year and a half. There's also values of equity and sustainability that show up through the plan. And we also want the plan to be outcome driven so we can really better measure and gauge progress on the goals and policies and actions of the plan. So that's kind of like the purpose. Flip over to the next slide. There's a fun graphic that kind of conveys the, what are the chapters of the regional plan. So, some examples are economic development, natural resources, housing, the working landscapes, so things like agriculture and forestry, facilities and utilities. So a lot of these similar chapters you would see in the Brandon Town Plan. At the nexus of all these chapters is the land use chapter. And you also see in the top right corner of this slide that there's applicable Vermont statutes. So there are specific requirements pertaining to specific chapters. Now moving to the next slide.
So Logan,
Oh,
can I ask
yeah.
a question before we get into Act 181?
Yeah, absolutely.
So this group, with your help, worked
Mhm.
very hard to get the town plan done in
Right.
24.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. So we were a little bit ahead of the regional plan.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we determine if there's anything that's not in sync between the two plans? And if there is, what do we need to do about it?
Yeah, so there's essentially how state law works is that there's this idea of a conflict between a municipal plan and a regional plan. And what that means exactly is that regional plans are used in development proceedings, Act 250 development proceedings, as well as the Brandon municipal plan. So criteria 10 in Act 250, one of the criteria is conformance, quote unquote, with the municipal and regional plan. So a conflict would be if one of those plans, a development would be in conformance with one plan, but not in conformance with the other. And essentially, when those situations occur, it's kind of the Act 250 entity looks at whether there's what's called a significant regional impact. And that's a term that we're required in the regional plan to define whether what we constitute as a significant regional impact. And so if it is constituting a significant regional impact, they defer to our plan. If there's not a significant regional impact, then it defers to the Brandon Town Plan. And if there's no conflict, which often, just when we're thinking about the last 8 years, in our current plan, we have a plan that was adopted in 2018. Most of the time there is no conflict. So and most of the time they're just reviewing both those plans for conformance. Did that answer your question?
And all,
Yep.
Is that new, significant impact?
No, that's not new as of,
I mean, in the last 7 or 8 years.
I don't think that's new as of the last 7 or 8 years. I could look and see when that started. I believe though it's been around for quite a bit. I know it's not something as new as it's been around since at least 2018. I could tell you that.
Which is when I stepped out of planning, so.
Gotcha.
Because I seem to recall when I did solar projects and large projects, it always deferred to the local zoning and town plan.
Yeah, and it really also depends on the region. Some regions, their definition for a significant regional impact has been, the bar has been so high that it's you very rarely reach that bar, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm curious
yeah.
what the definition of that.
Yeah, and so that's one of those things that, and I'll get to this towards the end of the presentation, but eventually we'll have a full draft of the regional plan. And so that draft definition will be available. And so that'll be available around June, I think 9th is the date. Yep.
and all 7 of the regional planning commissions are on the same schedule, right?
So for adopting the regional plan, all the regional planning commissions are going to have to adopt the regional plan by a certain date. Basically, everyone's adopting a plan that's in compliance with this new law sometime as soon as this fall to as late as the end of 2026. So all the regional planning commissions have to be essentially in compliance by the end of 2026. We're targeting the middle of 2026. So we're like the middle of the pack, I guess is a way to put it. But we're also constrained by regional plans work in an 8-year cycle. So you need to have another plan adopted before your current plan expires. So we're also constrained by that, which is why we're targeting mid 2026, because our current plan that was adopted, I think it was adopted in June or July of 2018. So 8 years from that. So we have an additional deadline, if you will.
So we are a border town.
Yeah.
So is there anything that we need to be aware of that's Addison County's regional commission is working on?
Yeah, so they are also updating their regional plan, and so we'll be, when we get to the Act 181 in the categories, their regional plan is going to have the same sort of category. And maybe we want to jump to that slide, because that is the next slide on this packet, and I can elaborate a little bit more on that. But essentially, part of a regional plan is looking at surrounding regions and sort of where there's kind of what's going on in terms of kind of adjacent development patterns and adjacent regional plans. So there's actually, there is going to be a dedicated chapter that is specifically relating to adjacent regions. And so there'll be actually a whole section that pertains to, that's actually the section that we're still working on, because a lot of the regions are working on their plans. So it's kind of hard to write about something when we don't know what that plan says exactly yet. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I guess I'll move on to the next slide, which shows these categories. And this is where I'm going to jump into the regional mapping. So there was a law passed in June 2024 that impacts the future land use map. So I had mentioned we've had a future land use map in our organization since 1971 or 1972. And from then all the way until this law was passed, we had the authority and ability to kind of decide how we wanted to categorize areas. So we had different schemes of categorizing areas and calling them different things and with different purposes over the decades. This law is now standardizing the mapping categories. So all 11 regional planning commissions across the state of Vermont have to use the same categories. And then there's also state law, which and this is where I'm now going to flip this over, and this is a draft wide map. And I have additional maps that will blow this up just to Brandon. But essentially, this law essentially outlines these 11 categories, and then this right here, this very tiny text, which is about 4 pages, is specific criteria. So in order for it to be mapped in a specific category, it needs to essentially check off all the boxes, if you will. But it is to say, we will eventually get to a nice big blown up version just for Brandon, so we can really dive in. And so I'm going to give some brief regional context so that you have an understanding of kind of regional background, and then we'll kind of focus more on Brandon specifically. So starting off, looking at this sheet here, there are downtown centers and village centers, and these are the sort of mixed use centers or core of a of a given village. So Brandon in the mapping has both a downtown center and a village center, and the downtown center being downtown Brandon, and the village center going to be an area relating to Forestdale, and a center in Forestdale. And I'll show you those exact boundaries later on and exactly how those were made, and get folks' thoughts on that. These boundaries will actually be enrolled upon approval of our regional plan in the state designation program. And so that's a pretty notable change, that kind of the process of being enrolled in the program is going through this regional plan adoption. And so just to be clear, anyone who's currently in the state designation program, so Brandon's state designated downtown, all the benefits associated with it right now are going to be maintained. So to be clear, in other words, benefits adding area of land that would gain benefits. So no one's losing benefits. So now moving on to the planned growth area or village area. These are areas that surround the downtown center or village center, and are kind of neighborhoods, if you will. And so these boundaries, upon approval of the regional plan, will become a neighborhood designation, and we can talk about specifically kind of what the benefits are to that designation. But a planned growth area and a village area each surrounds downtown Brandon and Forestdale. So there's, basically there are these 2 centers in town, and then there are these 2 neighborhoods, if you will. These areas, these 4 categories, are the areas that could be eligible for specific Act 250 exemptions. So I'll definitely want to make sure, we're thinking about if the town basically can opt into, there's no requirement that you have to enroll, but you can opt into specific Act 250 exemptions. And those exemptions are classified as Tier 1A and Tier 1B. And essentially tier 1B is a housing exemption specifically, and tier 1A would be being exempt from Act 250 full stop across the given area. Now moving on to the other categories which do not relate to the state designation program and they do not relate to Act 250 jurisdiction. There are these transition infill areas, which are kind of areas that are served by sewer and have an opportunity for kind of a higher density, but for one reason or another weren't categorized as a downtown center, village center, planned growth area, or village area. There are these enterprise areas, which are kind of like your industrial parks or a commercial land use with a large amount of land area. So for example, in Pittsford, the Amia plant is a pretty notable example you can see on the regional level, that is. But there are some enterprise areas in Brandon as well. There are resource-based recreation areas, which are they're essentially recreation areas with currently a high amount of existing development or infrastructure. So like a ski resort with condos nearby, or a shoreline that's been developed with shoreline housing, that sort of development. So it's not just any recreation area. It's a recreation area with that's been like more developed with infrastructure and buildings. Then in the far right side of this graphic, there are rural categories. And these categories really, the hamlets are just dots on the map. So they're not like a district. They're just acknowledging essentially a historic cluster that couldn't be categorized as a downtown center or a village center. And then rural general, rural ag and forestry, and rural conservation. And these are really pertaining to where we're giving our highest support for specific activities, but it isn't to say that we're saying rural ag and forestry needs to be like that. We're only saying ag and forestry. We're just saying like we're giving our highest support for that activity. But if someone wanted to go and develop, then they can. Kind of goes back to the idea of the flexibility as one of our values that we're trying to show in this plan. So essentially, rural general is giving the highest support for like a rural development, rural low density development. Rural ag and forestry is giving highest support for agricultural and forestry activities, and rural conservation is giving the highest support for conservation. But just want to reiterate again that we're not saying if a parcel's in rural conservation, we're not saying you can't put a single family home, for example. There might be other reasons why, though, that state regulations might make it difficult, or local regulations, things like that, but just on the level of the regional plan. The next two slides I'm going to go through fairly quickly. Essentially, on the regional level, this is conveying percent of land area, number of buildings, and number of towns by the categories. And, really just kind of writ large, there's the region's relatively rural. So 94% of the region is categorized in one of these three rural categories. And the remaining 6% is in one of the non-rural categories. And this speaks to the land use plan, the state's land use planning goal, our land use planning goal around, maintaining historic settlement patterns of compact villages separated by rural countrysides. So that is my spiel on the regional map. I'm now going to zoom in on Brandon. And before we look at the draft map, I kind of want to set the stage of what our currently adopted future land use map is, so that you can kind of get a comparison of what these maps are, what we're kind of going from. And so, the RRPC, as I mentioned, we over the years have categorized land in different ways. The 2018 regional plan, future land use map, and a few other plans before it, that basically we had 4 categories, and all 4 categories actually show up in Brandon here. And this map right here is the current adopted map that was adopted in June or July of 2018. And so essentially there's 4 districts or categories. There's high density, medium density, low density, and development constrained. Really high density is, essentially downtown Brandon and surrounding it. And so it's this darkest green right here on the map. There's this medium density, which largely pertains to, Forestdale. And then there's low density development, which is, I'd say most of the rural land in Brandon that's not in downtown or in Forestdale. And then there's the development constrained, which is, this great, right?
Great swamp.
Great Swamp, yep. And then, to think about this might have to do with steep slopes, but I could be wrong.
That's
Yep.
Probably forest.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. But essentially there are these reasons that there are development constraints. Does this map make sense? The high density, medium density, low density, and development constrained? This is 2018, so this is what we're currently adopting. And I just want to kind of set the stage, and then we'll move into the draft map if folks are ready, but if there are any other thoughts. This is the one that's in place right now. Yep.
This is the one we're moving to adopt.
Yeah, and the thing about this that I should have mentioned maybe from the beginning is you'll notice here that there are firm lines on this map. So you notice where like it goes from one district to another, and you can clearly see our current regional map. If we actually looked at the official adopted map, you'd see these boundaries are actually blended or blurred. And so you wouldn't know when a boundary starts or stops. And we no longer can do that. So that's something just to keep in mind. So we wanted in preparing for this, you to be able to see firm lines, but just being aware that this map wasn't really intended to be depicted as firm lines, but it's a little bit helpful in kind of understanding what areas we're talking about. Great. So I'll move on to the draft map. And ultimately it's a draft, and that's kind of why we're here, to get feedback. And one thing I'll also mention, and so now if we move on to the next page of the slides, there's a pie chart that kind of breaks down the percentages on the town level. And also, I just want to flag, because I really want to make sure I get this for everybody, but essentially we're really looking for questions or revision requests within the next 3 weeks or so, and we can start that process ultimately just because of this timeline. And being able to include all the input. We do have some wiggle room if needed. But I also just wanted to flag that that there is a deadline if you do want to change the map in certain ways.
So was this map created by inputting in GIS certain?
Yeah,
attributes?
and so and I'll kind of explain now that I have this, kind of how we arrived at what we're looking at. And folks are welcome also to get closer if you want, or whatever you'd like to do. I think that will all work. And so how I've typically explained this map is I like to go district by district and kind of start at the village, like a specific village or downtown, and kind of work our way out. And so I think I'm going to start with downtown Brandon, that is. And let me make sure I have my sheet right so we can really understand what the boundaries, how did we get this? Where did I put this? Here we go. So the downtown district or category, which is right here. This is Brandon's state designated. Oh yeah, I've been using both because I'm not 100% sure.
The light.
Okay, yeah. So this one though is always on, right? Gotcha. Yeah, I thought I had the battery in, but that's why I've had this one on as well, just in case. So I think we're all good. Better safe than sorry. So the Brandon's current designated downtown, state designated downtown, the entirety of that downtown is included in the downtown district. Except, or not except actually, in addition to that land area, the boundary was expanded very slightly to include the entire US Post Office. So the current boundary actually bisects a small part of the post office. So we wanted to make it clear that the entirety of the post office is included in the boundary. So I don't think the implications of that is very big, but I wanted to just make you all aware that there is a small boundary adjustment to include the entirety of the post office. So it's clear that the entirety of the post office is in the boundary. In addition, it was extended. We were able to extend it to adjacent mixed use areas. And so it was extended up Union Street, up to the Union Street grocery. So essentially, and you can see that here by this additional extension right here. You can get as close as you want. Yeah, no. So it'd be essentially right here up to the Union Street Grocery ultimately. And so this, upon approval would be the area that would be enrolled as, what is being called a center, essentially, which is this, it's just a new name for the designation program and how they're recategorizing it. But it is to say that any area that's currently designated as a state designated downtown maintains all their benefits.
And Logan,
Yeah.
why was it extended to the grocery and
Mm.
not further on? I mean,
Yeah, and I'd be
what's
interested.
the logic there?
Yeah, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. It was extended up to it just as a practice of, we really wanted to include adjacent mixed use areas, and the idea of mixed use is making sure that it's often a mix of a civic or commercial and residential. That typically was the case. Although mixed use doesn't have to be that. And so, beyond that area, about what other businesses might be beyond that area. There might be the
Well, there's the, down by the train tracks, there's the
Right.
granary, there's the,
yeah,
what's the,
right,
Phoenix Feed,
yeah.
the YMCA or whatever that used to be.
Yeah, and so the other that I think is mapped in some of these other categories, which commercial and civic uses do show up. I think it's that's something that you might want to consider as a revision. And I also wanted to mention that I'm going to take notes as we're making notes. We do want to keep everything in writing so that we everything. So we do want like a formalized request, whether it's the planning commission or the select board, however the town wants to do it, just so that we have in writing clearly that, if the town wants this revision or that revision. Yeah. And so, I can make a note though, relating to potentially expanding it further down Union Street, if that's something you think makes sense. Or maybe it's something you want to think about a little bit more as a potential expansion. Maybe it's something, maybe we talk about a little bit later. But that is the downtown. I can move on now to the planned growth area, which surrounds it, for the most part. Yep, yeah. And so that is the planned growth area. And I know some of these colors can be a little tough. That down to the standardizing, there's a standardized methodology. So all the RPCs are implementing the law in the same way. So we're interpreting some of these provisions the same way.
Yeah, that's.
Yeah. Yep. And I can sort of talk about why that is the case. And
It's already.
yeah. And I can kind of explain how we did this. And so yeah, I'll move on to the planned growth area. So the planned growth area, the boundaries of that area is essentially based off of sewer service area data that made available. So one thing that we would be helpful or anything is that if there are additional areas that you think might be served by sewer. So the reason why this, so that is served by sewer. That's good to know. So pretty much the entirety of Mount Pleasant.
Just that there's only a couple connections right now, but it's
Right.
being built out.
But
so
it could
it's-
be served.
Yeah, sewer.
Yeah.
Both, right? Yeah, it's both. Mount Pleasant.
Right, there's.
Sewer. Yeah. Yeah.
We did just find out that there's a spot in here by the pond that's not served by water or sewer. So there was some spots. cutting
Oh,
ponds.
Hmm.
right next door. to me.
They wound up-
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so that's good to know that this part is served. So that's the reason why it's currently not mapped like that, was because the data set we have, which by no means is perfect, it's just the best data we have, does not depict it as that. And maybe that's just because there was no development there, and so it doesn't register that. But so I made a note on that, that the entirety of this should be included. So essentially, based off of that data set, it's the sewer service area, except state mapped river corridors or federally mapped flood hazard areas are excluded. And you'll also see that part of the sewer service area, it gets cut off here at Yeah, right here, right? So Marble Street where it turns into Forestdale. And this area is also, you know, a lot of these boundaries, if we were to look at the Fairhaven, or, whoa, not Fairhaven, we're in Brandon. At the Brandon zoning, I've been all over the place. At the Brandon zoning map, you know, some of these boundaries, you know, where these sort of start and stop kind of aligns with the neighborhood zoning district. And, you know, for example, up here, the mixed use zoning district, so includes, you know, Park Village and, yeah, and so essentially, you know, it's the sewer service area, no river corridors or flood hazards, and it's cut off here where kind of Marble Street and Forestdale meet up. And then there are these some of these similarities with your map. Yeah, right. Yeah, no, that's a good question. We are, you know, there is a point, and I would be interested to know maybe if you all are like, hey, we would like this to be included. Our reason why we're a little bit hesitant is that one of the state's new planning goals is pertaining to avoiding strip development. And we're a little weary of making this one big area that would be all connected as like a contiguous strip. So this is generally the area with the least amount of current development. So this would be the area where strip development could occur. And so, you know, that was sort of the logic behind, but you know, we can certainly talk about whether that, you know, if you folks see that differently. And
This is land growth or village area?
planned growth area. Yep.
I feel like this should be down
As a planned growth area.
because I'm looking, this is plan looking 10, 20 years out.
Yeah, it's 8 years, and the tricky thing is that, you know, some of these criteria pertain to, even though it is a future land use map, how the law is designed is some of it does pigeonhole into what is currently there, which I know sounds a little backwards.
We have plans to put in a new water
mm,
tower, which will service this area.
yeah, and- yeah,
And bring water to this area.
right. And so that, you know, might make that,
Not in the next 8 years.
yeah. Well, and it only needs to be, it would only need to be one or the other, yeah. So, and another challenge is planned growth area. There's some considerations around sidewalks and like the percentage of the land area that could be served by sidewalks.
Yeah.
And so that may be a challenge in this area, depending on, but it is to say that this map, we acknowledge will likely change over time more than our previous maps. For example, if, you know, infrastructure and those sort of things change. So it's really kind of what is currently there, or if things are planned, it needs to be a lot more than a, you know, the town plan says this. It needs to be a lot more firm. It would need to be like the town has already committed this amount and we're already, you know, we're already scoping this, and the state's bar is pretty high if we want to consider something planned infrastructure. They really want to see that it's not just a throwaway line in a planning document, but actually that there's some real meat behind the plan, if you understand what I'm saying, whether that's financing or some more serious scoping is my understanding.
So is there hard guidance as to what criteria are necessary to change the map in the future? So that we
Yeah.
give towns a goal, like if
Right.
they do X, Y, Z, then we'll be able to move that.
Yep. Yeah. And so, yeah, I would say, yep. Yeah. And so it's really these criteria that are in state law. And then there's some guidance essentially just from the RPCs that we're clearly interpreting. So for instance, the word walkable comes up, and it's kind of, walkable is one of these things where it's like, how exactly do we uniformly decide if one area is walkable and one's not? So that's an example where like the guidance has been helpful. And so walkability is like if a land area, if 70% of the buildings in a land area are a 1/4 mile radius from a sidewalk. So that's like that's just a way that the RPCs have decided that we all are in agreement of, okay, this is how we're deciding if a word is walkable, because state law didn't specify exactly what is walkability. So it is to say that there is some specificity
Yeah,
on.
I'm just saying,
yeah.
my concern is that this map is made based on what's existing,
Yeah,
and it's supposed to be future.
right.
Forward looking, and I not, so just pigeoning that into enterprise, will
Mm.
that limit us in 5 years or 10 years? So just rethinking how that
Yeah.
area is labeled.
Yep. Yeah, and I think the the trickiness is that the other categories that might be well mm, yeah, I think that would still be true. The other categories that it could be mapped, it might not be eligible for one reason or another. But I think the point that I want to make a note for is that this area more generally, which is it fair to say it's really the mixed use like
The high
zoning
school's right
district down?
there.
Yeah,
High
right.
school's right there. We
Yeah.
have some we have some.
Yeah. So thinking about
Commercial.
essentially how that area is categorized strategically for the future.
So, so does the land use map, is that rigid for 8 years or can that part evolve?
So essentially, we can amend the regional plan formal. There's like an official amendment of the regional plan is one route. State law through this new Act 181 framework also established what they call a minor, I think it's minor map amendment is the terminology they use, but basically if it's a certain number of acreage, I want to say it's 10 acres or something like that, but if it's a certain number of acres that's only being changed, so like 10 or less, I think is what it is. So then it goes through like kind of a streamlined process that really I think only pertains more to the town in question and things like that. But we are expecting this map to change more over time. And this map also is just a draft. We're expecting through public engagement and through some refinements, we're also expecting some other boundaries to change, really more relating to the rural categories. So essentially, the planned growth area is kind of how I described it. The village area, there's a tiny village area here, which is actually the remainder. This is essentially the river corridor. And essentially, we're able to map it as a river corridor. State law allows us to map this as a village area, essentially, but it doesn't allow us to map it as a planned growth area. And the reason why we can map the river corridor is because Brandon has river corridor bylaws. And so we're able, river corridor bylaws and flood hazard bylaws or regulations. And so we're able to map this area in the category in village area, but not planned growth area. Really, though, the most of the village area category is surrounding Forestdale. And so now I'm going to kind of transition to Forestdale. And so I'm going to first start with the village center, which would be the mixed use center in Forestdale. I want to first kind of start off that I know that the Brandon Town Plan has expressed interest in designating Forestdale as a village center. I might be wrong, but I did not see in that town plan any kind of specific map. Some towns like to go and kind of preliminarily say, hey, this is what we're starting to think about with Forestdale. So I just wanted to point out that I did notice that the town is interested in designating Forestdale as a village center, but there wasn't any specific map or description of the exact area that would be designated. I also want to let you all know that in doing this, we reviewed historic architecture of Rutland County, which kind of describes the history and the historic structures in Forestdale. And why that's relevant is that that's kind of a requirement for being mapped as a historic village center. So, as many of you probably know, Forestdale is around the Forestdale furnace and settlement patterns kind of around the early to mid 1800s that kind of surrounded the furnace. And so the boundaries were done to kind of include the intersection of 73 and I believe 53, maybe that's North Ave.
Yeah,
or
North
Street.
Yeah, North Street.
North Street, yep. And really I was using the historic structure map through this state booklet, Historic Architecture of Rutland County, to kind of really make it so that it's including the historic structures that are currently there. And then
We have a lot there.
there
Historic structure.
there are some, and I could forward that map for you. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
probably
shutting
not.
the School.
It's yeah, the word "a lot" might not be a good word. When I mean a lot,
A few.
a lot, I think is a relative term. In some towns, 3 or 4 could be a lot. But yeah, it is to say that there's clearly enough historic structures to check the box in terms of the state law. And essentially is also thinking about these sort of mixed use clusters. And so I know that there's a handful of commercial and civic assets that kind of are around that intersection. Are there any thoughts on this village center boundary? And this would be this sort of like hot pink, I guess, if you will, on the map.
How does it overlay
Just
with
where I would
what
put it.
we zoned?
It's all neighborhood zoning districts.
So it overlays with whatever we did. Cause I would think as long as it follows what we kind of mapped out.
Yeah. Yep, and maybe this actually might even be helpful to move on to village area, which is this lighter pink. And the village area is the remainder of the
That's,
the neighborhood.
that's Forest Brook.
Road.
Yeah, yep. And so then the remainder of that sort of neighborhood area, and so there's a lot of similarity in this village area boundary and the neighborhood boundary up in Forestdale. And this area, some of it is served by sewer, and in cases where it's not, which I believe is more up here towards like Deer Run Road, we had to make sure that the area is has what's called suitable soils for a septic system. Another one of these terms that what exactly is suitable soils. And so the definition that all the RPCs are using is that A&R has a septic suitability rating map. And so and they have 5 classifications. And so class 1 through 3 is considered adequate soils for a septic system. With class 3 being that it's still, there's a little bit of uncertainty there. So I do want to acknowledge that just because it's in class 1 through 3, it's still possible that when you act, it's no excuse or it's no replacement for a test pit or actually going out and really doing the
What's that area?
due diligence.
Yeah.
Are you talking about the area where?
Forest Brook, yeah, right where you're kind of. Right? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I would think there's no clay or.
All of those
lots
are half-acre lots.
I used to
Yeah,
live there.
and so there are little, if you went and looked here, you'll see there are little tiny, there's like there's 2 circles that are cut out from the neighborhood boundary, which is, it's all north of Deer Run Road and south or west of Fox Road. These 2 pockets are the areas that didn't meet the suitability. Or this, I think this is the gravel pit.
This is a gravel pit,
Okay, gotcha.
and this may be the water district
Okay,
land,
gotcha.
pretty sure that's what that is.
Mhm. And so these 4 categories, essentially what this would mean is that the downtown center, or actually, let's start with Forestdale. Forestdale, upon approval of our map, Forestdale would be what's called a step 1 center. So since Forestdale is not currently in the state designation program, you're a step 1 center. This prep packet we had sent ahead of time, page 5 of the prep packet outlines the exact benefits for each designation. And so a step 1 center is basically eligible for the Better Places Grant Program, which is a placemaking grant. Would be eligible for essentially tax credits, so things like facade improvements, for example, or like fire code related improvements. And then also funding priority if there are like kind of plan related stuff relating to that center. And then the planned growth area and the village area would be eligible for a neighborhood designation, which you can see in that far right column of the prep document. And so, that'd be eligible for priority consideration and priority funding for specific state programs and state grants in this area. These designations are really housing focused. So another, benefit is that you'd have priority funding priority for state and federal affordable housing funding in these areas, the planned growth area and the village area. And then also another example is that state wastewater permit fees would be capped at $50 for residential development. So also some, kind of direct, I guess you could say, financial relief for permits. So I also now going to transition to I mentioned that this map relates to Act 250 and that the town has an opportunity to opt into Tier 1B or in the future Tier 1A. And so if you go to the next page, page 6 of the prep packet, does everyone have the prep packet? Just because, okay. And Seth, if you want, I can give you this one, and I have my own. Okay. So essentially, you'll see on this that there's kind of a written description of each one of these tiers. What Act 181 is doing is transitioning into a location-based Act 250 jurisdiction, which means that it's considering the location of the area in addition to the scale of the development. This map only, and I might say this twice, but our map only relates to Tier 1A and Tier 1B, which are the Act 250 exemptions. This map does not relate to Tier 2 or Tier 3. When we did a region-wide training, and during the region-wide training, there was a big X through this map to really convey this map does not pertain to Tier 2 and Tier 3 areas. And these areas, I'll briefly just mention that essentially Tier 2 would be business as usual Act 250 with the addition of what's called a road rule. And what that means is that an additional trigger or reason that you might need to get an Act 250 permit is if roads exceed 800, if a single driveway or road exceeds 800 feet, or if all driveways and roads, like there's a development project with multiple driveways, multiple roads, exceeds 2,000 feet. And then there are these Tier 3 areas that is, in my mind, there's quite a bit of a question mark currently. It's going through a rulemaking process that a lot of it is to be determined. A new entity, the Vermont State Land Use Review Board, new as of June 2024 passage of this law, is starting the rulemaking process. And so I'll follow up. There's some public engagement they're going through their own rulemaking process pertaining to this. But essentially, these Tier 3 areas would contain quote unquote critical natural resources, and there'd be additional rules pertaining. So there'd be additional stuff that would be required in order to get an Act 250 permit in these areas. We currently don't know what those areas are, like where are they? We don't know. And we also don't know what those additional rules are. All of that is going through the rulemaking process with the Vermont Land Use Review Board. What we do know is, we can talk about these Tier 1A and Tier 1B and Tier 1A areas, which you can see this table at the bottom of the handout, and it stretches on into the next page. And essentially, Tier 1B would be all 4 of the categories I've already started to talk about. So downtown, planned growth area, village area, and village center. These areas could be eligible for, if the town chooses to opt in, so the town doesn't have to opt in, it's up to the town to decide. But if the town does choose to opt in, upon approval of the regional plan, there would be an Act 250 exemption in these 4 categories for a housing development of 50 units or fewer on 10 acres of land or less. And so anything between a single family home up to 50 units. And that would be pertaining to, all of these areas. There's also Tier 1A, and Tier 1A could be eligible for downtown Brandon. There's a little bit of uncertainty. This process is going through the Vermont Land Use Review Board. versus tier 1B, and I apologize, this might be confusing because they're very similar names, 1B and 1A. But tier 1B, which would be all 4 of the categories, could be possible for Brandon and Forestdale. That process would actually be going through us, and basically we'd be submitting tier 1B requests on behalf of all the region's municipalities. And then upon approval of the regional plan, though, like, then that exemption would be valid, would be in effect, sorry. Versus tier 1A, it doesn't involve us and it goes directly to the Vermont Land Use Review Board. But it is to say that this table in the handout is a side-by-side comparison and hopefully answers some of the questions that folks have relating to the differences. But so if the town, what we are telling towns is that if you are interested in tier 1B and you might also be interested in tier 1A, to apply for tier 1B for all areas, and then you can additionally apply for tier 1A in the future. The process to be able to apply for tier 1A, you can't start it yet, but you can apply for tier 1B, and applying for tier 1B would be filling out this form. I have one copy of the form, but I also have, just for folks that are aware, this form is available on our website, Rutland Regional Plan, or rutlandrpc.org/plan 2026. But essentially, the tier 1B would be, the implications are that, there'd be an exemption of state permitting, state Act 250 permitting in these specific areas for tier 1B, that is.
Okay, so if
yeah.
we don't opt in.
Yep.
Development needs in Brandon needs to go through Act 250.
Yeah, so it would be
Right.
like status, yeah. Yeah, yeah,
Whatever
yeah,
the Act
yeah,
250
yeah,
criteria are.
yeah,
If we opt into 1A
One-
or 1B.
1B,
We go through you. If we opt into.
to get
1
approval, yep.
Right. If we go through 1A, we have to go to the new land use board.
Yep, yeah. And they're still finalizing, and to be clear, when you go and give it to me, or, to us,
Yeah.
we give it to the land use review board with all the forms, essentially.
Okay,
Yep.
so when we give it to you,
Mhm.
do you then do the whole permitting process with the land use board? Like, do we have to pay anything? Are there?
So
So if
you,
we were to do it directly,
Excuse me, are we talking 2 different things? Because I'm getting a little confused. One
no, it's.
one is the
understandable.
application for 1B,
Mhm.
and the other is once we're in 1B for specific
or
development.
we could choose to do 1A, right?
Yeah, so one.
That's why I'm trying to understand what the
yeah,
differences are.
Yeah, yep. So just in terms of what the exemption is 1B is housing units, 50 units or fewer, 10 acres of land or less, is exempt. 1A is everything in that area would be exempt, any type of development, whether it's housing, commercial, what have you. Regardless of the size of the land, regardless of the number of housing units, regardless of, it would just be all development is fully exempt.
So if Brandon opts in for 1B,
Mhm.
we would also, within the town of Brandon, have tiers 2 and 3.
Yep, yeah, and that would be, and where those areas are, and that's totally outside the scope of this
Well,
map.
it's not
this
within
map.
those 4 areas that you pointed out.
Yeah, so if the town, so if the town opted in to tier 1B or tier 1A, then that area that is classified as tier 1B or tier 1A could not be classified as tier 2 or tier 3. So you're only one of the tiers.
So the area down by the high school would be a tier 2 or a tier 3.
Your area down by the high school is, like
Yeah.
the union, so would be tier 2 or tier 3.
So the planned growth area would be fewer Act 250 expenses
Right,
as opposed to trying to build down there.
right.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I would really, point to this packet that really provides, kind of gets into the details. I will say that, for tier 1A, the requirements to actually be eligible for tier 1A is a little bit higher, I would say, is definitely higher than for tier 1B.
So when I said we would have to submit, it's not we, it's
Mm.
anyone who wants to develop in Brandon would go through you if we were
Mm.
tier.
Oh, I should have been more
1B,
clear.
Right?
I should have been more clear. So when I mean the municipality opts in, that would be a decision of the select board. And so the select board would basically have to make a motion in their
Right, right,
minutes,
right.
and that would be, yep.
But I mean, it, instead of somebody doing an Act 250 permit and going
Mhm.
through whatever board it's called now,
Yep.
they go to you
Oh,
to build a subdivision of 50 units
oh,
or less.
no.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
no,
What's
no.
the point of the tier?
No, essentially the process, all we're doing is being a part of the process to get approved for it. So once you have that exemption, so once you have tier 1B,
Uh-huh.
then when someone wants to build however many housing units that would be eligible, what that just means is that they would not be required to get an Act 250 permit.
And they just go through our.
And they
normal-
would just go through your normal local
Subdivision.
zoning.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's kind of recognizing that there are areas that are kind of, some other regional planning commissions have used the term pre-screened. And that the idea that there's infrastructure, okay, the town has local regulations, okay, there's sidewalks or what have you. And it means that it doesn't need to go through Act 250, that's as the state has determined essentially. Because it checks off all these boxes of the
Okay.
criteria in the
So,
regional.
so currently the RPC weighs in on Act 250
Yeah.
and they wouldn't in the future for a 1B area.
Yeah, because you wouldn't need to go through Act 250. Like, so if you don't need to get an Act 250 permit, then our organization has no reason to weigh in. There's nothing to weigh in on.
Do you need feedback though? That, so the area by the high school, somebody put in a 49 unit development on 9.5 acres,
Yeah.
which would be exempt from everything. Would you like a courtesy notification?
So just to be clear, when you mean the high school, you mean like the Union?
Otter Valley.
Yeah, Otter Valley. So that would be an example, that would be outside one of these areas. So it wouldn't be tier 1B eligible because we're talking about like here, right?
Okay, then
Yep.
let's move it
Yep.
closer to the.
So yeah, let's say like, in, let's say Park Village or, yeah, like in Park Village, then you would not need to get an Act 250 permit. You would still need to get all your other permits.
But would our RPC want to know about it?
No, our role is really limited to conformance with the regional plan. And that sort of like that conformance with the regional plan is limited to Act 250 proceedings. So if you don't have to go through to Act 250, then the conformance with the regional plan is moot in terms of a regulatory. The development would still have to go and get their permit from the town.
This map, then,
Yeah.
only the pink and purple is eligible?
Yeah, these and not this purple, and I know that can be a little bit confusing. So this sort of. Yep. These four categories, that, on the packet where you can see it has like a center neighborhood, and then underneath it has tier 1A and tier 1B, tier 2, tier 3. But because technically, if the town doesn't opt in, right? Like I said, it's up to the town to decide if they want to opt in. If you choose not to opt in, then it could be whatever, that the land use review board through this process ends up making it. And so, yeah. And so there's kind of two aspects I think that are worth thinking about. One is whether you want to opt into tier 1B, and then two is are there revisions, say you do want to opt in, are there revisions to the map that could be made where there might be certain areas that could be eligible? Our intention was that we wanted to map as much based off of state law, as much as we can map of being eligible for tier 1B, or A. We tried to map it to the greatest extent, but that is to say that maybe, there are other areas the town might be interested in. And then on second look, when we go back, we are like, oh, we're wrong. But, so I think an example with that would be an addition here, right? Because we identified, okay, this is served by sewer. And that was really the reason why this wasn't mapped as planned growth. And so that's an example of, okay, that extension could be made. But And these aren't questions you have to have an answer to now, right? This is ultimately, I'm really here to kind of provide the information for you all and answer any
I'm just trying
questions
to-
and,
Yeah, I'm trying to understand. So tier 1B,
right.
centers, downtown and village, planned growth areas and village areas.
Right.
Any 50 units or fewer on 10 acres or less
Yep.
and mixed use developments are
Yep.
only those things are exempt
Yep.
in those areas.
Yep. And if the town opts in, yep.
If the town opts in.
Yep.
If we were to choose tier 1A,
Mhm.
it's only downtown and village and planned growth areas and
Mhm.
all development. is
Yep,
exempt.
and it would be only if they were eligible. So I could tell you, I would want to triple check, but I believe, I don't know if Forestdale would be, because as you mentioned, right, it's only planned, it's centers and planned
It's a
growth
plan-
areas.
Right, right.
So it wouldn't be the village area, for tier 1A.
Right. I'm-
Right, but this center in Forestdale, I would want to triple check, but I believe it would not meet all the requirements for 1A specifically. Mhm. And it,
All of Forestdale has water and sewer.
yeah, I think
But
it might
ev-
be this, oh, sorry. Go ahead. I think it might be this criteria on this list relating to how, and this is where we're a little bit unclear, where it's, you can see subsection E. In the tier 1A area, adopted municipal bylaws must further smart growth principles, regulate physical form and scale, allow for at least 4 stories in areas served by water and sewer, and follow other guidelines as established by the Land Use Review Board. Those guidelines are not available, so we don't really know. For tier 1A, it's a little bit unclear of, that's why we're saying opt into tier 1B, because it's a lot more clear now. And then if, you are eligible for tier 1A down the road, once these guidelines come out, then you can apply for that and then get tier 1A. And so that's what we've been advising, just given that there's a little bit of uncertainty of, what exactly are these guidelines going to say? We don't know.
So I
So,
think
yeah.
one of the key questions here is there any other area here that should be, covered in a planned growth area?
Mhm.
So
Or
that it would enjoy the benefits of 1B.
yeah, or if it's 1B specifically, it could be a village area as well. For 1A, it would just be planned growth. Or I guess it could be the downtown, but
So I mean, the town is relatively fully developed in the areas that are
yeah,
indicated here.
yep.
If there were to be additional growth, it would probably be outside of
Mm,
the planned growth area.
yeah, or some sort of maybe like redevelopment of a certain area that's already currently developed, and those things are kind of hard to.
And we know Act 250 deters a lot of development because of the expense.
Yeah,
So is there any area on this map that we should see if expand to be a planned growth area?
So when do we have to have our comments on the map to you by?
yeah.
'Cause
So
I
we're
feel like we shouldn't
yeah,
figure that out right now.
yeah,
And that we should have a meeting,
yeah.
our next meeting.
Complicated enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. We're hoping for comments 3 weeks, and so the date is on the slides. We do have some flexibility in adding a week or two, but it is the sort of kind of going back to the timeline. We do need to have enough time to incorporate the comments and kind of have a final draft so that we can go through the whole process. That is like a 4 or 5, I think even 6-month process.
I think we should talk about this at our next meeting and provide.
I think it might make sense to invite the town manager and the economic development director. Because they can fill us in on their plans for village designation for Forestdale. And if they're aware of any other locations that we should adjust the map to include.
Okay, so I think do you want me, or I can keep moving on to the other categories that would not relate to Act 250 and would not relate to state designation program. We can also keep talking about these.
So basically it's status quo, correct?
Yeah, and yep, so it would be either tier 2 or tier 3. But that's outside we don't know what, yeah, we're waiting on the rulemaking process. The rulemaking process is starting like now. I think it's the end of, I'm gonna send this as a follow-up email, but there's like their first public engagement meeting, I think is like May 23rd or something like that. I will follow up with the exact details, but they're like starting with like initial public comment on, where I think it's where the areas would be, like what quote unquote critical natural resources would be mapped.
Seth, did you have a question?
in
I
tier
just
3.
wanted to share with the planning commission that everything I've been to about this has kind of indicated that we don't have in place anywhere in Brandon, and we don't have the capacity to be tier 1A. It required, I think, local building codes and stuff, which,
I saw it.
and design
Yeah.
standards, which is
Yep.
this would be very far out of what we have
Right.
available.
This is
So-
Rutland City and Burlington.
Yeah.
We're really thinking Rutland City might be the only area with tier 1A, but there are some terms that we're really not sure, like what is adequate municipal staffing for comprehensive planning and capital planning development review? Like, what does that mean exactly?
It's probably not
Right.
Larry 3 days a week,
Um,
right?
yeah, and that's why
That's
that was what we were like, is like, does that mean a full-time zoning administrator?
Yeah.
Cause like, that's different versus then like, oh, the capacity of the zoning administrator is adequate relative to the amount of permits coming in. Like, those are two different types of adequate. So I don't, that's why tier 1A, there's kind of some more question marks on that, and the bar is definitely higher. But I guess we don't know how high is the way to put it.
And I have let the select board know, like, when I go to something like this, I usually give them a little summary memo, and they're pretty much like understanding that, what we should aspire to is tier 1B in the 2 villages would be a great scenario for us. But as you point out, if there's additional spots that could be identified for planned growth, maybe so. Like, I don't know if Natalie wants to talk about, like, the fire district is not like just in conceptual stage about expanding water
Gotcha.
delivery. They're further along than that.
Okay. Yeah, any of those documents are definitely helpful to send to me as kind of one of these things, because these are the sort of things that we'll need to, if there's not a water system currently and it's planned or things like that, we need to be able to ultimately justify everything to the Vermont land use. They review what's new with this law is that we have to submit our plan to this state entity, and they have to make sure we're checking off all the boxes in each town. So
So there's no downside, right? For us, for those 4 areas to, to.
so
Then
we,
outside of those 4 areas, it's status quo, right?
you might not love my response on this, but and I know that's probably an interesting way to start that sentence, but we're hesitant to use terms like good and bad. I really am more like to say the implications of what it is. So the implications are what we've said, which is like, you don't have to go through this permitting process. And talking with 27 towns, I think some folks would say that might be good, and some folks that might say that's bad. So we kind of want to be more in the realm of what were the implications? Okay, you don't have to go through this permitting process. And yeah, leaving it.
Puts a lot more responsibility on the town to
Mhm.
make sure that
Yeah.
we cover risks.
So,
Right,
Yeah.
but like, it's only for 50 units or fewer on 10 acres or less.
Mhm.
And mixed use developments.
Mhm.
So if somebody wants to put in I don't know, some huge industrial plant, they still have to go through Act 250, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And if they want to put up 25 housing units and they're exempt from Act 250, they still have to go through your local zoning.
Right.
right, does it make sense? And I'm trying to think a little bit in future terms.
Mhm.
If, in order to get areas exempted from Act 250 via tier 1B, would we be better off designating a greater growth area now?
That's what we want to talk about. The
Yeah.
next meeting is
Yeah.
to see,
So
should
I'm
another
thinking,
area
No,
be
if
included?
there are places that we want to see housing, then we should include those, and if there are areas that,
Exactly.
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we're on the same.
Mhm. Yep. And okay. So I think I'll move on to the other categories. It seems like you guys kind of have like an idea of what the sort of next steps you're thinking about. I'm gonna move on to the transition or transition infill area. This is this segment in between the two, Brand or downtown Brandon and Forestdale and the surrounding neighborhood, if you will. And this is an area that's served by sewer, and is it also served by water? Along this stretch of Forestdale Road. In any case, and it excludes the part of that area that is a river corridor or a flood hazard area. And essentially is another, and the intent with this area is making it, more dense, and to the degree possible, and acknowledging that, current configuration of where buildings are, it makes it kind of difficult to do this, but if possible, to maybe even potentially put like a new street or something and turn this more into, the idea is that there'd be more depth and less of a kind of strip development configuration. Acknowledging though that just the current layout of buildings, it's pretty challenging to do that. Yeah, the golf course is on the other side. Yeah, right around here. Yep. And so it,
Cemetery.
yeah. Yeah, and so, but really the maybe what more is applicable is that there might be some opportunity though for additional density and kind of infill development and some of these lots and making it a little bit more developed. But yeah, and it excludes some of these flood hazards in that boundary. The enterprise areas are intended to be kind of land uses with either like a lot of jobs or a lot of employment, or they are commercial land uses with kind of a lot of land area, or like a natural resource extraction site. So the abutting Forestdale Village area, I'm not sure if this is really the right name for this, but on Google Maps this is labeled as the D and F pit.
That's
Yeah. So essentially it follows that parcel boundary. Is this how this boundary was created here?
There's a big solar array in the northern part of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. That's right. Then there's also I think it's pronounced Laws Agricultural Services
Oh,
on
Champlain Street.
Champlain Street. Yep. And so that's right here. And all of these actually follow parcel boundaries. There's Hayes recycling pallets in the transfer station, which is on Corona Street.
Yes.
This area right here, those two parcels. And then I didn't really know how best to categorize this area, but like the Alta Woods part of Brandon. And so this is where like Blue Seal and Fisher Electric and I don't know what the name of that pit or extraction site is behind Blue Seal, but okay. And so, yep. And so those are the enterprise areas. Do you think there might be other areas in town that, could be classified as enterprise that aren't already classified
You
as
got the industrial park.
um where's the industrial park exactly on here?
Is that off of Jones or?
Okay. Yeah. Gotcha. So that would be, yeah. And do you think that's, appropriate for that to be included as one of these areas that could be tier 1B? And maybe these are one of these things you want to think about down the future, but
Well, it looks like it is.
yep. Yeah. I guess that's my question is, do you want it to be? But that's
along.
this is Park Village. Yep, I believe so. Yeah, it might be one of these. I don't know. It's one of these things. Like I think it pulls data from like Google Maps, and I've noticed there are like some of these really weird, like additional little granular details that they sort of make up. That might be one of them. That like weird loop. So yeah, that's currently what the enterprise areas are. But if you think there are other enterprise areas, I'll double check though that the industrial park is in the planned growth area. I think it is though. I think you're right. Yeah, and that kind of speaks to like there are situations where a parcel could be classified as more than one category. And so we kind of had a hierarchy. Actually, the way that we're going through this is the hierarchy of how an area was. So, just like okay, the industrial park could have been a planned growth area, or it could have been an enterprise area. And so the planned growth area kind of supersedes that if it could be classified as one or both. Um, Similarly, like if it could be a downtown center or a planned growth area, if it was eligible for both, it fell into the
Just south of, Port- yeah. That's something that would be developed.
north of the downtown.
It's,
right in here.
what's it called, Black. Construction company. This is Black Diamond. Black Diamond.
Just north of Black Diamond.
Okay. And you're saying it's a pit, basically?
It's an out of. Are you on Arnold District or you on?
Oh, Lover's Lane.
So definitely north of Lover's Lane, seems like.
Oh, that's, okay, yeah. Because we have, okay, there's like. I think
Cattail's
kind of like here. Yeah, I would say enterprise, right?
Mm,
Because we've
yeah.
got Black Diamond, we've got.
Yeah.
Self-storage.
Oh,
we've got
okay.
Quarry.
Now I know where we are. Gotcha. Black Diamond. Yep. That's definitely helpful. That's definitely a good one to consider.
Yeah.
So we're talking about map modification, so like
Mhm.
if there's a very early stage, like inquiry about
Mm.
multiple housing, that's on
Mhm.
parcel, like. Is this the time or is this not?
I would say, if
Jeff-
I like actually don't know what you're talking about. So just being honest, so it's not like I like secretly know what you're talking about or anything like that, but to be clear, I would say that's now, if the town wants to make a decision on that, now there would be value. So that parcel could be eligible for being mapped as, say, planned growth area or a village area, or you might want us to look into whether it would be mapped as that, then yeah, it could be the time.
Maybe that's.
Yeah.
something we can talk about
Yeah.
at our next-
Yeah, I would say that's like that's ultimately something I think that's up to the town really, whether, yeah. Mhm.
This is where Bill's, Bill with economic development is very big on. Bill tries to.
Kind of keep stuff that's in development basically like entirely confidential until somebody's ready to be public with it. And I would love for the map to be cooperative with this plan if it's
Mhm.
appropriate, to be considered in this spot. It's adjacent to one of the already marked
Yeah,
pink, purple.
Gotcha.
areas.
okay.
I mean, I think the
But-
bigger issue is if we are considering as a town to
Yeah, we want,
encourage development,
Mhm.
we should include as much.
yeah.
Yeah.
We shouldn't limit it where the development already. is.
Exactly.
I also want to note that
Okay.
you'll see that there's kind of similarities. I've kind of mentioned at certain times that like, oh, this boundary is similar to this boundary in your town zoning or your town plan. One of the requirements for both village area and planned growth area is that it has to align with the town plan. So there, essentially if there's that sort of conflict. So like that was part of the process of reviewing. That's why a lot of these boundaries do look similar or somewhat similar to your town's maps, and that's intentional. So it is to say that if this parcel or whatever conflicts with those maps, that might be an issue on our end and justifying to the state when they go and look at those maps and compare and contrast and see, hey, is that box checked? So that is something to keep in mind. But ultimately, you know, identifying what those areas might be and saying, hey, could this be eligible? That is this sort of feedback, you know, we definitely want to hear. And we can go and provide that rationale of, hey, it could be eligible or not eligible. And here's why. But really want to get into the weeds of once we get that information and really confirming that all the boxes are checked or not checked and so on. Yeah, so those are helpful for the enterprise area. There's no resource-based recreation area in Brandon. That was the one that I mentioned where it's kind of buildings and infrastructure associated with the recreation area. It's like a pretty high density developed shoreline or ski resort with condos nearby. You know, and so the remaining, yeah. Yeah, and so the remaining categories are rural and so essentially I'm going to start with agriculture and forestry. So if you're not in any of these categories we just discussed, right? So the 4 categories that relate to tier 1B, the transition area, the enterprise area, if you're not in any of those categories, but you are in the current use tax program, which essentially is a program where you get it's a tax program that ultimately, in order to qualify, you have to demonstrate, hey, there's a degree of agriculture and forestry activities. And so if you're enrolled in the current use program, specifically in 2023, which is the most up-to-date data we had, then you were classified as agriculture and forestry. And so you can see these boundaries, you know, are parcel boundaries. You know, the parcel's in the program, the entire parcel is in the boundary. It's not. Then I want to point to rural conservation. And rural conservation is a series of these conservation planning layers or mapping data from the state of Vermont. And essentially, you know, so if you're not in the current use program, but you are in one of these conservation planning mapping layers, then you fall into rural conservation. And just to be clear, though, just because you're in rural conservation doesn't mean you could put, you know, a single family home, or if you're in rural agriculture and forestry that you can put a single family home. We're really more concerned when it relates to rural development in whether that development is of a rural character. So we'd be, you know, where we might be a little bit more involved is if, say, there was, you know, a big box store in a rural area. That's sort of the more like kind of regional significance. We're not really concerned about a single family home or things like that.
You're talking about rural conservation?
Yep, and we're really also talking about more broadly, you know, just the rural categories in general. We're not really, we're not saying that, hey, you're in conservation, you can't develop. It's just that, you know,
But
really.
some of the rural conservation actually has areas that you probably can't develop.
Exactly. Yep. Right. So, for example, like wetland blocks of 5 acres or larger are included. And so, you know, developing on a wetland, there's state wetland permitting. Another one is, you know, like conservation easements are included. So, if you have a conservation easement, can't really develop. And so, those are the sort of, you know, that's a good point, is to say that we are kind of mapping you know, these sort of kind of existing constraints. And then rural general is the remaining land area that, yeah, it's just remaining. It's not in current use. It's not in one of the conservation planning layers. It's not in any of these other categories we've discussed. And so, you know, it's general. So it's, you know, we give our highest support for, you know, low density development. But it is to say that, you know, the reason why we do that is that in aggregate, region wide, the soils are more able to accommodate a septic system in the rural general category relative to the agriculture and forestry and conservation category. But it also has a lot more of the existing buildings. And that's because there's soils that can accommodate a septic system. It's kind of a feedback loop on that. But that's essentially how this map was created. And, you know, I think in terms of percentage of the categories, the percentages of land covered is fairly similar if you go and compare with the regional statistics that I mentioned earlier. Although I think Brandon probably has more of these core 4 areas, definitely than the median town or region wide. So that's my spiel on the future land use map. Now I'm going to just kind of close out on the regional plan writ large. And I think I might even, I'm going to, yep. And so our, we are eventually going to be releasing the first draft of the entirety of the regional plan. The regional plan is going to be definitely over 100 pages, so it's a lot to read, right? So we wanted to provide some more accessible ways of kind of understanding what the regional plan is about for folks who don't want to read 100 pages. Totally understandable. And so, you know, here's kind of like on the most basic accessible level, here's kind of like a fun cartoon that kind of conveys, you know, what some of the themes and what the regional plan is about, again, in a, I'd say a pretty fun way. So, you know, for example, in Rutland City, you know, the infrastructure is here. Why not build it? So, you know, kind of speaking to, hey, there are these areas with existing infrastructure, sewer, water, say sidewalks, things like that. And we want to capitalize on these existing infrastructure. Here in Brandon, you can see someone that is, you know, messing with a water pipe saying, hey, we have plenty of capacity for new development. And so, you know, conveying, hey, there are systems with infrastructure, and some of these systems have capacity, and we want to capitalize on that capacity as an asset. Another example, you know, kind of in Chittenden, we can talk about kind of, we want to support agriculture and forestry products and that industry. So an example of a forestry product is maple syrup. You know, there's also, you know, thousands of historic buildings across the region. So you can see examples of, hey, we can use these historic buildings for housing, or hey, we can use these historic buildings for new businesses. So capitalizing on these existing assets. There's also a need for more affordable housing, but there's also, you know, some challenges with the cost of building, you know, affordable housing, and you know, also the demand for, you know, more expensive or luxury housing. There's also challenges with flooding, and so the need to kind of adapt to these new, like more common floods, the protection of scenic resources, the protection of natural areas, you know, walkability. And so ultimately, you know, in a fun cartoon, you get a sense of sort of what the regional plan is about. Maybe this isn't enough for you. And so, you know, in addition to this visualization, we also have for each chapter of the regional plan. So you might remember that I had that fun graphic that has all the circles of all the chapter names. So for each one of those chapters, there's a 1-page summary that kind of in 1 page summarizes what the chapter is saying. So, you know, what are the current conditions? So for example, in housing, how many housing units are in the region? What are the prices? There's also a section on future needs. And so, you know, how are demographics changing? So how will that change the future needs for housing? So for each one of the chapters, there's a 1-page summary. The visualization, the 1-page summary, all of that is already on our website, rutlandrpc.org, Plan 2026. And the full draft of the regional plan will be available on that website around the beginning of June. So in, you know, a handful of weeks. And, you know, for the visualization, the chapter summaries, the full plan, those questions I kind of led with, you know, does this plan reflect the right, you know, priorities for the region, community economic development priorities for the region? Do these priorities make the region a place you want to live, work, and play? And so those are sort of the questions we're going to be getting public input on through a survey, and we'll also be doing some in-person events to kind of get the word out that this is it. The last page or second to last page of this slide handout is just kind of a next steps. So as I mentioned that, you know, any revisions or questions about the map, if you could submit those, and then in the next 3 weeks, and if you need a little bit more time, just let us know. And we can extend it a little bit for you, like another week or two. And then if the municipality does want to opt into Tier 1B, we're looking for that Tier 1B decision form.
Over there.
Yeah, and so the Tier 1B decision form would be really due by July 1st of this year. And we can always help if there are questions with this form. Yeah, and so basically the two things are, you know, as it pertains to the map would be, you know, what revisions might be made, and then also does the municipality want to opt into tier 1B? And then also, you know, if you want to provide feedback as we're going through just broader phase 3 public engagement, that also be great. So again, thank you for taking the time. I know this has been a special meeting, so I really appreciate. Sounds like some folks were at a meeting last night as well, so I appreciate, you know, you all taking the time to have another meeting and hear the spiel. And you know, I'm glad to hear that there's folks are thinking about potential revisions to the map, because that's, you know, that's why we're here. We want that feedback, and we ultimately want to include as much feedback as we can, but we ultimately need to show to the state that we're checking off all the boxes so that the plan's approved.
Well, we love meetings and
Yeah.
our next,
Can we get an electronic version of this to
Oh,
look at?
I'm glad you mentioned that. So if you go to the website, rutlandrpc.org/plan 2026, and you scroll down, you'll see a list of meetings of all the meetings we're doing. We're meeting with all 27 towns. And under this meeting, you will see the slide handout and this exact map as a PDF. I will be leaving that map here. So, yep. Yeah. And in terms of what the revision feedback, we're really looking for that feedback in some sort of documented form. So it's just so that we're making sure we have it documented. That can look like anything between here's a written description, here's a drawing of a map. So maybe you want to print out some sort of map and draw, maybe you want to draw right on that big map. However you want to do it, we just need it to be documented. That's ultimately our main takeaway, but whatever's easiest for the town.
so our next meeting would be 20 days from now, on June 2nd. Was the town manager believe that we could review this kind of information at that meeting?
For the third, do you have a select board meeting?
I do believe, and I would love to get something to the select board either at the May 26th meeting or the June 9th meeting from the planning commission, like a sense of the planning commission kind of vote that you believe tier 1, something that the select board should do.
I think that
Like, is there a reason why tonight could you pass the planning commission, like tier 1B? I just would like to. I'd like to make sure that there's an opportunity for the select board if they're like suddenly. I don't think they're suddenly, like, I think they're on board based on what I've been kind of providing them as little summaries. But you never really know, like, once it comes to like being the form that needs to get from us. I want to have a chance to read this. So I'm saying.
I think we just need to determine the growth.
How about we do?
why don't we ask trustee?
Probably. We're generally positive on applying for T1B.
Also, just want to make one other thing that's in the prep handout as well. But I just want to say it too, that you could technically say like it's part or whole. So you could theoretically say, yes, downtown Brandon, but no Forestdale, or I guess vice versa. But yeah, that is to say, doesn't sound like that's coming up, but I just wanted to make you aware that if it does come up, that is.
We can select certain areas to be in tier
So
one,
what
B.
our understanding is that it would be like this cluster and that cluster sort of not like, not here, like one little, right?
Yeah.
So that would be like, if you had an issue, let's say, of like, you're like, oh, we just don't want this tiny piece right here, then we would just remove that tiny piece from the planned growth area boundary or whatever boundary. But if you were like, yeah, we just want to only opt in for one, you know, blob or however you want to call it, district, or, you could opt for that.
So if I understand it, if you put together village center, planned growth area, village area, and downtown.
Yep.
That's what we're talking about.
Yep, exactly.
That's 6.2% of the land area according to
Yep.
this
Yeah,
guy.
if you're adding it up right,
Yep.
then you're adding up right. Yep.
And the rural is like 70. And that's just the top two rurals, the rural conservation and rural agriculture forestry. And if you put in the rural general, you're at 90%. So
That goes back to
this
that
is
sort of
pretty,
regional.
it's focused, I think
Yeah.
it's not saying just because we want to kind of make development easier in this 6.2%. It's not like going to be the Wild West all over Brandon. It's
That's
going to be
right.
in a really focused
Right.
place.
And it sounds
Improve
like
our
we
zone.
can focus it even more if we want.
And the state, when you see materials in Act 181, there's one of the things that we've conveyed is that the goal or the intent of this is to support the state's land use planning goal since the early 70s, which is to maintain historic settlement patterns of compact villages separated by rural countrysides. And you probably can understand how that goal fits into this map of where we're mapping compact villages and rural countrysides.
So the blue prevents, the Wild West.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm still a little, I'm exactly confused. It seems like Act 250 said we're gonna have, population centers separated by natural areas,
Or rural areas, but yeah, I see that. Yep. Yeah.
which makes a lot of sense to me, and I think it's a very desirable goal. But now we want more people,
Right.
so we have to undo that a little bit.
And I think that's the challenge where it's you build. I like to use the term you could build out or you could build up. And so like that's the alternative where you could build up, but then does that fit the character of the village? And so that's the sort of I think that's and then also, okay, you can build up so much, but if there's only a few areas where you could build up, then what is like you still got to build out.
And
Yeah.
building up really limits desirability of the area.
Right. Yeah. And so there's a question of like, yeah, depending on how tall we're talking about. Right. Yeah.
That goes under, it's okay.
So does the town manager for the May 26th select board need to have the vice chairman be there to present anything?
Who's the vice chair?
Went right over your head.
We did, it totally did.
We need the planning commission to,
So I mean, I want to first just thank you all and Logan for doing this tonight, because if you were here last night, we were here till after 10. There was no way that this conversation was going to happen in a select board meeting in any form. And so I appreciate you coming for a special meeting with the planning commission. I appreciate the planning commission basically going to bat for the select board on this, and so do they. Do they need someone to be there to present it? So it would be helpful, to talk about it. I mean, I think that I've gotten them a little bit used to, like, when I need them to consider something, I give them like a 1-page memo that says da, 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 and they can ask questions or not. Sometimes they don't. I mean, to me, this isn't like out of left field kind of thing. Like they've had 6-ish months of, kind of a slow dribble of this is kind of coming at you at some point. I just don't want like the time to put pen to paper to be like the last available meeting of June.
so do we feel that the planning commission needs to vote on a sense of whether we want to recommend Tier 1B?
I would move to approve or opt in for 1B.
We have
I
a second.
second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
I,
Aye.
So that was a motion to recommend to the select board tier 1B. Okay, for Brandon.
It seems of all the things that we talked about, that's the least downside of
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. Any downside, we just wanna look at our
Mhm.
area.
Yeah, and I think looking at that on. A monitor would be pretty much easier.
Looking at it with parcels,
There's parcel boundaries.
is that a possibility?
Yeah, so we're working on, so one thing I forgot to mention is that on the same website that I've mentioned and is on the back of the slide handout, one other resource is that there is a web map that has this map, but with transparency, so you
oh,
can
I
actually
love the
see.
layer thing. you
Plus
had.
layers.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Is
so
that
you-
parcel?
and that was what I was gonna get to, is that we're working on getting the parcel boundaries up there. So yeah, that has been a common feedback of parcel boundaries being helpful. And so yeah, we will have that up and hopefully the coming days to a week. So yeah.
Okay, so I'll put together an agenda for